mistakes were probably made here. I think this is probably the worst thing I did to the image. It would definitely be like, oh, you're having fun. You're having a great time. No, don't do that. One thing I'm going to try to do for this edit is not use Photoshop. We're going to try to do it all in Lightroom and see what we can come up with. While today's lesson is a bit embarrassing for me, I love it because no matter where you are in your photography journey, you can do this exercise. And it is absolutely the best way to remind yourself of how far you've improved in your work over time. Recently, I made a video highlighting just how much my work has changed over the last couple of years, and I found a lot of enjoyment and reassurance of just how far I've grown while doing that. In this video, I'm going to be going back to an image I edited 8 years ago and completely re-editing with not only what I've learned since then, but also how I've changed as a photographer. So let's head inside and I can show you the image that we're going to work with. Okay, before I show you the image, you have to promise not to laugh. I will know if you laughed at me, especially in the comments. Okay, jokes aside, you can laugh because I did. But this is the image. And now when you first see it, you're kind of like, okay, this is not too bad. This isn't too bad. But then when you look at the image that it started as, you start asking questions like, oh, where is the light on the mountains coming from? Or why did these trees randomly become yellow? And I'm not judging past me. Well, I am judging myself a little bit, but the thing about this is such a great example for this video because I was so proud of this image. When I took this image and edited it, I was proud of the editing, Alex. Like in terms of the actual image when I was there, the conditions aren't great. Didn't wait till sunset. And that was because I was on a family trip with my aunt and uncle. We were just in Zion, which is one of the places we went to pretty often. And I don't get to dictate the times I stay, how long I stay. And that was a lot of what I was shooting back then. I didn't have the privilege to be out and really dedicate time to landscape photography on these trips. So the thing I was most proud of was taking an image like this and turning it into something far more presentable in my eye. And even when I look at this now, I don't think it's too bad. I think if I were to re-edit this in the same way, I would not color the trees in fall colors like I tried to do down here. But other than that, it's not that bad. And really quick, before we do our own edit, I wanted to show you what I did to this image because it was quite a lot. So let's jump into Photoshop real quick. And let's just show you all of the layers over here. So this is the final image in Photoshop. And let's start out from the beginning. So this is the image we started at. And then I blended it together. You can see the mask right here on and off. And you're going to notice something is this really stark contrasty line here that I did not do a good job at blending together. So I created another layer that kind of fixed that. Kind of. It's still there. And it's not perfect. So let's zoom back out. I just wanted to point that out because these were the things that I was spending hours on learning. I was creating different brush things and trying to blend things together and learn how to edit in that way. And I don't fault myself for it because I loved how much I took from one thing and got to the next, even if it's not necessarily how I would edit now. So we're going to keep going through. I'm going to keep adding some layers in here. I don't know what this Orton effect thing was. Maybe I didn't even use it. I don't know why I would use it this low in the layers. I don't know. Okay, so this layer is definitely me adding some color to the clouds because we had 0 when we were actually there. This is creating some nice atmosphere in the clouds. The next one is, oh, there's the light on the mountains. I actually think that looks pretty dang good. So I think what I did is I used some of the color from the clouds, the same types of color, and we added some light that would be hitting those peaks as the sun is setting. You can kind of see it in the background here. You're going to notice that I have that part being the brightest and it trails off up here where it would be the darkest naturally. We did a pretty good job there. Next up, we're going to keep adding stuff. Some of these, I don't know what they were doing. Okay, this definitely darkened the foreground some. What did this one do? Okay, this one added a little bit of hint of color here on the ridge, but only a little bit. It's very subtle, but that is the kind of light that should be there if it was reflecting off of those peaks. What did this one do? I don't know what that one did. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, we're adding some more color into the clouds because clearly I thought there wasn't enough already. And this is adding some color to the river down here. And let's keep going. Okay, here's, mistakes were probably made here. I think this is probably the worst thing I did to the image. And if I was to be back 8 years ago behind myself, telling myself what and what not to do, it would definitely be like, oh, you're having fun. You're having a great time. No, don't do that. No one, we're okay without this. So I would say that this is probably my biggest regret to this edit, but who cares? You know, again, I was super proud of this image. I brighten that up again. And then our final little thing, it looks like I added a bit more here. And you can tell the color I added in the trees here, you know, it's pretty subtle unless you look over here on the right-hand side to where I made these red, and you're kind of like, oh, okay. And the way I did that was I was apparently using some kind of change to the color, and then I blended, and, you know, I honestly don't even remember what I did. But that is how we edited it 8 years ago. Now, let's jump back into Lightroom and edit this image how I would now. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. This year, one of my goals is to generate more sustainability within my work in this channel. My biggest cause of stress in this space has always been my sustainability, and a great way to work through that stress and anxiety is therapy. BetterHelp makes starting therapy really easy and much less intimidating for many people. The beauty of BetterHelp is accessibility and convenience by letting you have your therapy sessions as phone calls, video chats, or even just messaging, whatever's the most comfortable for you. So you can join over 4 million people who've used BetterHelp to start living a healthier, happier life by clicking the link that's down in the description. BetterHelp can match you to one of over 30,000 therapists in their network based on your needs, preferences, and location, which gives you access to a wider range of expertise than may be available in your actual local city. Signing up takes no time at all. You'll fill out a questionnaire to help assess your specific needs, and then you get matched with a therapist that aligns with you, typically in under 48 hours. Once you're matched, you can schedule a video or voice session, plus you can exchange unlimited messages through their app or online web browser. If you feel like your therapist isn't a great fit, you can switch therapists with a click of a button at no additional cost. And by clicking that link in the description down below, you help support this channel, and you'll also save 10% off your first month of BetterHelp, so you can connect with a therapist and see if it helps you. Thanks for checking that out. Let's get back to the video. One thing I'm going to try to do for this edit is not use Photoshop. We're going to try to do it all in Lightroom and see what we can come up with. So my biggest limitation here is I'm going to have to use an HDR blend. So I'm going to combine these together by selecting all of them and going to Photo Merge HDR. Now, I'm not going to make this look HDR-y, but I'm going to do my best, mostly just because we need to be able to recover those highlights in the sky, and I don't want to have to go luminosity mask or blend them together in Photoshop. Again, our challenge is going to be, can we do it all within Lightroom? All right, so now that that's created, let's go down here. Let's take a look at what we're working with, and let's bring down the highlights a bit to see where we're at with the sky. Let's see how well it combined that HDR, and it looks like the edges are not too bad here on this Canon 6D. I think that definitely looks better than it did on my luminosity mask, although there's a couple edge cases here that aren't great, but I'm not going to worry about it too much. I think it looks pretty good. Okay, first thing is go down here and remove chromatic aberration and enable our profile, because you can tell that on that wide angle, our edges of the frame are a bit too dark, and maybe we like that, but I would like to add that back in rather than it being baked into the image. So I'm going to leave it that way. One thing I'm noticing is the image is definitely a little bit too cool. So I'm going to come down here, Adobe Landscape, definitely too cool now. And I want to bring up my warmth quite a bit. I think I made a pretty good change to the image overall. The next thing I'm going to do is probably come in here and let's start adjusting our sky a little bit. See what our sky selection looks like. That's pretty good. You're going to tell that it's kind of fading into parts of the mountain, but usually the sky selection on Lightroom does that so that it blends better together instead of having that really rough edge. I'm going to bring down the highlights a little bit more there. The other thing I want to do is I kind of want to warm this up like we had in our original edit. Maybe a little bit. I think the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a lot of contrast in the image, but we're not going to do it with the tone curve. We're going to do it using my sunlight masking trick, which if you want to see, you can watch a whole video on it here. We're just going to use my Lightroom editing companion for that. So I'm going to bring down my entire exposure of the image by about 1. We're going to come over here to our pseudo sunlight mask and add that in. Let's go to our mask. Let's control our light here. And originally the light was definitely from the right side of the frame, kind of hitting those peaks over there. That's where it is naturally in the image. So let's kind of try to recreate that a bit. I think that's looking pretty good. I don't want to affect the mountain there too much. Definitely want this to bring more. Let's zoom back in so we can adjust this. Definitely going to brighten this up a little bit more. You're going to notice it's going to get really bright in the top right, and that's okay because we've darkened our whole image by about 1. And that's looking pretty good. Let's zoom back out. And now let's go to our control mask and do a little bit of editing here so we can control how bright it is in that top right corner. And we're going to come down, just bring it to about there. Now we can turn this on and off. And that's creating a nice source of light in our image. So if I turn this off and go reset my exposure, this is what we started at. And if I go back and turn this on, it's just got a far more contrasty look. It's got more of a light source in the image, which is obviously what I was trying to do back in the day here with all the painting in that I did. One thing I'm noticing though is that this part is definitely too bright. So something we can do here is we can actually, I think what we're going to do is we're actually going to cut this in half by about half there. Cut this in half. Then we're going to duplicate it. All right, so now that we have it duplicated, what I'm going to want to do is come in here to subtract. I'm actually going to go to object. What I'm going to do is create a pretty big brush. And then I just want to select this mountainside as my object here and see what we can get away with a little bit more control in our image. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. So that's with the object on and off. That is with the mask. It's affecting everything but that hillside. And so what I want to do is now that I have these two masks combined, I can adjust this to be a little bit brighter. For this is the whole thing. Remember, this is affecting the entire image. And this one, I'm going to come down to a bit brighter as well. But this is the one without the hillside. And then I'm going to come in here and go to subtract brush. And I'm going to have a flow of about 30. I'm going to subtract just a little bit from here as well. Again, I'm just subtracting from that mask so that the parts that are in shadow down here remain in shadow, kind of like I would do in Photoshop, but obviously we're still in Lightroom. So now if I look at my brush here, let's go over here, and we're going to look at our total. Yeah, let's create our flow a little bit more here. Make sure we remove that hard edge right there. We don't want that in our image. And I think this is probably pretty good. Let's create a bigger. And now it's not affecting any parts of that. Let's come over here. Let's create our flow a little bit less. And again, there needs to be more light on the left hand of the frame rather than the right hand of the frame. So every brush stroke I do as I move across is going to be lighter and lighter. So that's what we're doing here. And I think that's looking pretty good. Something along those lines. Let's get rid of that. And now if we brighten this up, it's not going to affect that right hand of the frame as much. So I'm actually going to come in here and decrease our other one that's affecting the overall image like this. I'm gonna come back to this one, bring this one up a little bit, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to decrease the exposure in the whole image just ever so slightly, and that's looking pretty good. I like that blend. Now something else I need to do is bring up the dehaze on the image a little bit. I'm going to bring the clarity down. You're noticing the foreground is definitely a bit too dark, and we're going to fix that in a second. So let's come in and create a big radial filter here. Normally I would do it in this size because it's a landscape, but I'm going to kind of create the oval in the same way the light is coming in the image. And this is going to brighten this part of the image just a little bit, which is what we're going to need. Let's zoom out and make this a little bit bigger. I think that's looking pretty good. Let's reduce the feather a little bit so it's got more. Yeah, that's looking not too bad. And let's bring it down some so it's affecting a little bit less over here. That's looking pretty good. Now, something I'm noticing is that this part over here just is far too hazy, and we probably need to add some dehaze to that portion of the image. My only problem is if I keep adding more to the whole image, it's going to have an effect on the whole image that I don't want. So what I'm going to do is actually just create a nice big radial filter here with a nice big feather. And we're just going to add a touch of dehaze right there at the center. Yeah, that looks much better. Like that. So if we turn that on and off, it's just creating a little bit more detail in that far off distance. I think that's looking pretty good. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is kind of adjust a little bit of the saturation and brightness of these trees. So we're going to come in here to our HSL. Now, we could use the color picker, the point color here. But I think what we're going to do is just use the HSL because it should get us where we need to be. I want to brighten the trees just a little bit. So I'm going to select my selector here and just bring up the brightness just a little bit. And then the other thing I want to do is change the hue of the trees just a little bit to more of a warm touch rather than that more neon looking green. And I think that looks pretty good. Overall, I feel like our image is getting close to almost done. Something I could do, for example, if I wanted to paint more light into this river, I can go my object selection tool and I could select just the river, and it's going to do an okay job selecting that for me. And I could bring up the whites in this so it's a little brighter, and I want to cool it off a little bit so it's not so orange. I think that's looking pretty good. Let's go back to our sky mask since our sky is looking a little too bright, I think. Actually, let's create a linear gradient because I kind of do want to affect some of those mountains there. And let's bring down the highlights a bit. Yeah, there we go. Not too bad. Again, one of the limitations we have is that this area definitely looks still a bit too hazy because, I mean, if we go back to the original image, there's a lot of haze in the sky in the distance there. And that's not looking too bad. So here is our after. Here is our before and our after. I do think the entire image can probably be a little bit brighter. Let's check our clips. It looks like we're clipping about right there, which I'm not surprised. But we can do a quick fix for that. We can just create another radial gradient here, right here. And we can bring down the highlights, bring down the exposure, check the clip, bring down the exposure some more, bring down the highlights more. And then what I'm going to do is intersect this mask with a luminance range. And then I am just going to select the brightest part of the image. I'm going to manually set this to basically be barely any part of the image. I don't want it to fall off there. And let's go to our radial gradient. Make this a little bit bigger. Make sure this doesn't look too bad here. Okay, and then we got to get a little bit more precise. So all I'm going to do is duplicate this mask. And then I'm just going to make this way smaller so we can fix that one little spot there that is a bit too bright. You could also use the brush tool for this. Doesn't necessarily have to be the radial gradient. I'm just trying to get that spot to not look clipped, which I think we just did. That looks a lot better. Now, overall, I feel like the sky is definitely having trouble being both a bit too warm in the clouds and a little bit too cool in the blues. So I kind of want to come in here and decrease the saturation of blue a little bit. That's not too bad. And then something else I want to do is kind of create more of an ethereal feel in the entire image. So I'm going to bring my clarity down some more. But I'm actually going to come out here and go to my luminance range. We're going to affect the highlights of the image mostly. I want the tops of the trees, the sky, everything like that. And I'm going to come in here and go to bring down my clarity a bit more in those sections. That's going to help all that kind of grunginess in the distance a little bit as well. I'm going to bring down the dehaze actually in this particular selection as well. Let's bring this down a little bit more. Don't want to go too far. I'm going to bring some contrast back in the image by adding some contrast there. Come back, and now I can bring some clarity back to the overall image. Something along these lines. And I think that's looking pretty good. All right, so here is our before and after. Well, I guess technically the before being 8 years ago edit versus the edit we just did. Now, I don't think this is a final edit on the right-hand side. I basically only spent about, what, 10, 11 minutes maybe editing this. I would probably walk away, come back to it, probably adjust some things, maybe white balance. Maybe those peaks in the distance are still looking a bit too contrasty. You can tell that there's like a line right here between the sky and the mountain. I might try to fix that, and that actually looks a little bit better over here. But overall, that's how I would edit this image in 2024. I actually think the biggest difference between these two is that I likely just would have never edited this image. So if I went out and took this exact image now, and I got back with this particular image on the left-hand side, I probably would never sit and edit it. Compositionally, great composition. I mean, Zion just kind of speaks for itself. But in terms of the conditions and the lighting, I probably would look at it and be like, it's not good enough. Let's move on to the next one. However, back in the day, I was taking so little photos, taking so little trips. And a lot of the times I just was sitting at a desk like, I want to do something photography related. What can I do with this small amount of photos that I have? And instead of going out and shooting my local area, I just went and said, how far can I push this image? And that was honestly really fun and exciting for me. And I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong here. Obviously, I have a few things, problems with how I edited this image back in the day that I accounted for when we first started the video. But I don't think I can't tell you what to do and what not to do with your image. Now, when I look at both these images, barring the color change on the trees here, I would probably still prefer my old edit, or at least the direction that I was going. But that's because I turned nothing into something with all of that light painting and color that I added to the mountains in the background. And I think I did an okay job at that. However, the one on the right is far more authentic to what I was actually experiencing in real life. And that's just something that I've changed or shifted about my photography. The other thing is I just take way more images now. I have way more to work on. And I would get back an image like this and be like, nope, let's move on to the next one. I can spend my time on an image that I actually enjoy, the conditions that I got, and we'll work on that one. So if this was helpful to you, let me know in the comments. Also, I would love for you should definitely try this yourself. Like if you have been shooting for a couple years, whether it's just last year, 4 years ago, or a decade ago, you should go through and open up some of your images and try to re-edit them. A lot of the times you'll find images that you're like, oh, wow, this could be in my portfolio now, as long as I use all of the new editing techniques that I've learned over the last couple years. So let's do that. And I've actually found a few hidden gems here and there, barring this particular image. And I'm kind of excited to go back and look through some of my catalogs to see if there's anything worth salvaging that I could use now. Anyways, thanks for watching. Thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this. And as always, there's got to be a rainbow out there somewhere. We just got to go find them. Later.